Welcome to the most frustrating, head-scratching, and downright disappointing episodes of the Loud House series. From characters acting completely out of line to plot holes and contradictions that will leave you shaking your head, these episodes highlight the worst of what the Loud House has to offer. Let's begin. No such luck. Everyone despises this episode, and for good reason. It displays the absolute worst treatment of Lincoln, subjecting him to random, unjustified torture over a ridiculous superstition. Lynn's belief that Lincoln is bad luck after losing a softball game makes no sense, and the entire episode spirals into an unbearable mess from there. The pacing is horrendous, dragging us through scene after scene of Lincoln being tormented by his family, who suddenly buy into Lynn's baseless superstition without question. The parents, who are usually portrayed as absent or ineffective in these moments, are no different here. Their role is especially frustrating since they take Lynn's claims seriously and even go so far as to isolate Lincoln from the rest of the family. The cruelty of the episode stands out. Watching Lincoln get unfairly blamed, mistreated, and eventually locked out of his own home was not entertaining at all. It felt more mean-spirited and completely uncalled for. It was like watching a character get beaten down over and over without any satisfying resolution. Adding insult to injury, the episode tries to wrap everything up with a weak apology after Lincoln, dressed as a mascot, proves that he isn't bad luck. But there's no real redemption here. The damage was done, and it was hard to forgive how awful the family had been throughout the entire episode. Even Lincoln's small moment of triumph felt hollow because the episode concluded with him still stuck in the ridiculous squirrel suit, showing that he hadn't truly escaped the bad luck label that his family had imposed on him. The fact that the same writer who penned great episodes wrote this one is ironic and embarrassing. It was disheartening to see Lincoln reduced to being a victim of nonsensical superstition and family cruelty when he's usually the logical one. There was no lesson learned, no meaningful development, and worst of all, no justice for Lincoln. Serial offender. Without a doubt, one of the most frustrating episodes in the show, largely because of how irritating Lincoln's sisters are throughout. Their behavior is not only disruptive, but downright idiotic at times. It's like they've all forgotten basic common sense. How did they not realize that their chaotic nonsense would eventually get them kicked out of the store? I mean, did they really think that releasing lobsters or juggling eggs wouldn't catch the attention of the manager? Their obliviousness makes you feel more sympathy for the store manager than for any of the Louds. And it doesn't stop there. As the episode progresses, Lincoln's sisters become even more unbearable, especially when they start fighting with Lincoln over his well-earned zombie brand cereal. After Lincoln went through all the trouble of sticking to the budget and managing the shopping list, their selfishness and tantrums just made it worse. They behaved like toddlers, throwing a fit because Lincoln wanted a treat for himself, which was infuriating. The idea that Lincoln somehow deserved to have his cereal taken away because he succeeded in saving up for it is just ridiculous. The sisters were clearly the real troublemakers in this episode, causing havoc at every turn. They weren't even subtle about it, letting chickens loose, spraying water everywhere, and wrecking displays left and right. Honestly, a more fitting punishment would have been for the sisters to get kicked out, not Lincoln. And let's not forget how Lincoln was blamed for their behavior. The poor kid had to endure being booted from the store while his sisters got off the hook. Then there's the classic issue with the parents, especially Rita, who dismisses Lincoln's defense. She never even took a moment to hear him out. He was clearly trying his best, and yet he gets punished anyway. But at least in this one, his sisters realized their mistakes and bought him the cereal as a way to make amends. But even that didn't fully redeem how obnoxious they were. Overall, Serial Offender is just one big pile of chaos caused by Lincoln's sisters, and Lincoln got unfairly punished for something that wasn't even his fault. The episode could have used a more lighthearted, friendly competition between Lincoln and his doppelganger instead of the sibling-induced madness. Out on a Limo. Out on a Limo takes Lincoln's character in a direction that feels incredibly out of place, focusing on his greed and immaturity in a way that contradicts the Lincoln Loud we usually know. Right from the start, Lincoln wins a limo ride for a day, which is exciting, but the way the episode handles his newfound status is clumsy and forced, making him act like someone entirely different from his usual self. One of the biggest flaws is how Lincoln's greed quickly spirals out of control. The Lincoln we know is generally down to earth and family-focused, but in this episode, he becomes obsessed with wealth and social status in the blink of an eye. His decision to ditch his sisters, who were excited to spend time with him, in favor of hanging out with Lord Tetherby, a rich stranger, shows how out of character he is. Lincoln is typically more caring and considerate, but here, he acts like an arrogant person driven by shallow desires. Another issue is how Lincoln tries to befriend someone much older than him, like Lord Tetherby, as if he could suddenly fit into the this elite social circle. Lincoln is only 11 years old, and his attempt to fit in with these wealthy adults comes across as completely unrealistic. He's portrayed as being easily swayed by luxury, a trait that doesn't fit his usual persona. The episode seems to suggest that a simple limo ride can transform a humble kid into someone who looks down on his own family, which is not believable given Lincoln's character development throughout the show. The episode also pushes this bizarre narrative of class, where Lincoln suddenly believes he's better than his family simply because he's riding in a limo. This shift feels both forced and unnecessary, and it creates a version of Lincoln that's hard to root for. He becomes rude to Kirby, the limo driver, and even adopts the snobbish attitude of Lord Tetherby, ignoring the loyalty and love he normally has for his sisters. His line, "A man in a limo can't be seen in a place like the Burpenberger," feels ridiculous and out of place for someone like him. Overall, Out on a Limo portrays Lincoln in an unfavorable light, making him seem shallow and disconnected from the core values he usually represents. It's an episode that tries to teach a lesson, but ends up contradicting everything we know about Lincoln Loud. April Fool's Rules. April Fool's Rules is hands down the worst April Fool's episode in the Loud House series, and Luan's character has never been more unlikable. Normally, Luan's pranks are mischievous but playful, fitting her prankster persona. But in this episode, she wasn't just pulling harmless tricks, she was downright cruel. Her pranks caused physical harm and discomfort to her family, and she didn't show an ounce of remorse. Hurting her family without any care for their well-being, all because of a holiday, made her character come across as sadistic, not funny. What made it worse was that Lincoln, the usual clever problem solver, was put through a ridiculous amount of torture at Luan's hands. He was slapped with pranks in nearly every corner of the house, from grease traps to boxing gloves and even vicious raccoons. The entire episode felt like watching Lincoln suffer, and that's not enjoyable. It's just painful. Watching a character go through so much misery, especially one as well-meaning as Lincoln, was more upsetting than comedic. To make matters worse, Luan never felt sorry for what she had done. There was no character growth or reflection on how far she had taken things. She manipulated the situation by luring Lincoln's friend Ronnie Ann over just to give him more grief. It was disgusting how she doubled down on her cruel behavior, and it was even more frustrating that she didn't face any real consequences for her actions. The only silver lining in this mess of an episode was Lenny. Her innocent misunderstanding of the kitchen this way signs and her pure-hearted personality were the only moments that brought any lightness. And the small satisfaction of seeing Luan get a pie in her face at the end was a fleeting moment of justice, but it didn't make up for the harm that she had caused throughout the episode. By the time the credits rolled, there was no real resolution. Luan didn't learn her lesson, and Lincoln was left to pick up the pieces of his ruined day. It was infuriating to watch an episode where there was no redemption for a character who had made life miserable for everyone around her. And that final prank on the family, an airbag full of paint, just cemented how terrible the whole episode was. Luan's smug attitude and lack of any remorse were what ultimately made this episode garbage. It didn't just make Luan unlikable, it almost made her unbearable. Project Loud House. This one is riddled with contradictions that make it a frustrating episode to watch, especially when compared to the general personality traits of the characters throughout the series. One of the biggest issues is how Lincoln's meticulous planning and strategizing seem to fall apart in ways that feel forced rather than the natural chaos that the show usually thrives on. First, Lincoln claims that he has a plan to get his sisters out the door on time, yet throughout the episode, he appears to be constantly thrown off by their predictable behaviors. For someone who supposedly knows his sisters well enough to anticipate their behavior, Lincoln was surprisingly caught off guard by basic things like Luan's pranks, Lisa's dangerous experiments, and Lori's phone drama. He even mentions that he needs a plan to handle Lori, but when she locks herself in her room, Lincoln resorts to an almost absurd trick, pretending to be Bobby, to resolve the situation. This action seems out of character for someone like Lincoln, who typically avoids outright deception of his family members. Another glaring contradiction is how Lincoln repeatedly takes on more responsibility than necessary. He offers to make breakfast for everyone and organizes the whole morning routine, yet none of his sisters seem to lift a finger to help until the very end. This feels out of step with how the Loud family usually operates, where the siblings often help each other in small, chaotic ways. Lincoln, knowing full well how his sisters behave should have delegated tasks to them from the start. Instead, the episode makes Lincoln bear the burden alone, which contradicts the teamwork seen in other episodes. Additionally, there's the contradiction in the portrayal of the sisters themselves. Some characters, like Luna and Lucy, seem unusually passive and unhelpful until the plot demands they step in. Luna, for example, is usually quick to help Lincoln, or at least be understanding of the chaos, but here she casually adds to the confusion with her gear and roadie. Meanwhile, Lucy, who is usually considerate despite her dark personality, spends the entire episode reading morbid poems to Lincoln, which seems unnecessary and uncharacteristically antagonistic. The episode concludes with the sisters stepping in to help Lincoln recreate his project at the last minute. While it's a sweet gesture, it feels like a forced resolution to an otherwise chaotic and stressful experience that Lincoln could have avoided if he had just received help earlier. The idea that the sisters magically come together in the end contradicts the lack of support they offered throughout most of the episode, making it feel like the solution came too late and only served to wrap up the plot. In short, the whole episode was packed with contradictions that undermined the personalities of the characters and felt like it wasn't planned or carefully thought out at all, like it was a rush job or something. All right, that wraps up our breakdown of the worst episodes of the Loud House series. Whether it's unrealistic behavior, frustrating plot lines, or just characters we love acting totally unlike themselves, these episodes completely miss the charm that makes the Loud House what it is. But hey, even the best shows have their off days. Let us know which episodes left you feeling disappointed, and as always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.